A lot of people ask me how I fund my travels and how I've been doing this for the last 15 years. And the major source of income that I have is storytelling. So I've been a storyteller for over a decade now. I have my own blog, newsletter, Instagram. I write for travel publications. So pretty much every part of my work involves storytelling. And so in today's video, I want to share a little bit about my storytelling process and how you can also turn your travels into meaningful, relatable stories. So let me give you a little bit of background about how I became a travel storyteller, a travel writer. And this started way back in 2011. I was still working at the Singapore Tourism Board at the time, based in Singapore. And I was part of the digital marketing team. So I was following a lot of travel writers and kind of reading about how they travel the world for a living, literally. So they travel to places, they write stories about them, and then move on to another place. And it sounded absolutely like the dream job because I enjoyed writing since I've been a kid. And it's something that I wanted to do too. So I ended up taking a leap of faith and I quit my full time job in Singapore. I moved back to India and I started living in Delhi. Don't ask me why. So I lived in Delhi for a couple of years, and my goal was to figure out, can I live a life that allows me to travel, and at the same time find a source of income. So my goal originally was to work with a non-profit organization or a social enterprise, support their work, and hope that their work would be in remote parts of India, so I would get to travel there. So that's what I started doing initially. But I also had my very young blog at the time. So as I traveled, I started blogging quite a bit, and I would write for different publications across India. So back then in 2011, Instagram didn't exist, which was great actually because I feel very nostalgic about those days when you could be slower in the way you experience travel and slower in the way that you told stories. And I think that's still the kind of philosophy I believe in, even though on Instagram it feels like everything needs to be created right now and posted right now. But my point is, through all of this, the one thing that remained a constant in my life was my travel blog, which is called The Shooting Star. And it's still very much a part of my life. And that's how I started, building this repository of stories. It also became the place where I really showed up to practice my writing. As someone who had no photography skills, it also became a place to experiment with photography. And then eventually Instagram came about, and I think everything changed. So a lot of that storytelling kind of shifted to Instagram. I think I was at this junction where, I was working with a lot of brands, but now instead of just the travel blog, they also wanted to collaborate with me on Instagram. And I felt like it had come to a point where, in order for me to be relevant, I had to tell, similar kind of stories on Instagram. So when I joined Instagram, I kind of started experimenting with like long captions and narrative stories, and those did really well. I really found like a great conscious community on Instagram. But then when Reels came about, everything changed again. And at that point, I challenged myself to try video storytelling. I hated it initially, but eventually I really kind of fell in love with it. So let me start by talking about what my travel storytelling process looks like. The first thing I do when I'm thinking of traveling somewhere is to think about what kind of stories I want to tell about the place. And I think the one thing that has been really helpful for me in terms of finding the kind of stories I want to tell is to, no matter what budget I'm traveling on, is to not stay in conventional places. So, back when I started traveling, I was very much a budget traveler, a backpacker, but I have actually only stayed in a hostel like maybe twice in my life. And I know that might surprise a lot of you, but my whole idea of traveling is not necessarily to connect with fellow travelers, but to connect with local communities and local people who live in those places, because that's where you gain the deepest cultural insights, and you can really learn about what life as a local is like. And those are the kind of stories I was interested in telling. I have nothing against hostels. I mean, I think hostels are a great place to meet fellow travelers, but depends on what your goal is as a storyteller. Do you want to meet people from around the world who have come there and kind of build this network, or do you really want to immerse in the place that you're in, and that's best done by living with locals? So I think the first thing is to really think about what kind of stories you want to tell, and so shape your travels based on that, because what you end up doing on your travels is very much going to influence the kind of stories you tell. Now, one thing that I practice really closely on my travels is active listening. And this is the idea that everybody has a story to tell. You just have to have a listening ear. And I think as you start observing this, you'll notice that everyone wants to talk about themselves, including us, including me. But so few people are willing to actually listen to you with an open heart, with an open mind, with curiosity. And I think this kind of listening leads to the best kind of stories. So, like I said, everyone has a story, and it's happened to me so often that people are sitting on really incredible stories about their life, about where they live, about their neighborhood, about someone in their family, but they don't realize the value of the stories that they're sitting on. And so, as a storyteller, if you can probe a little bit more, spend a little bit more time, go a little deeper with them, build that relationship so they have some sort of comfort with you, I think you can find incredible stories wherever you travel. So, when I do travel writing workshops, I often like to break out the entire group into sets of two or three so that people can practice this technique of active listening. But you don't have to wait for a workshop. You can actually do it right where you are, whether that's actively listening to your family members, to your friends, to a shopkeeper that you interact with regularly but have never had a real conversation with. And when you do this, you'll be surprised at the kind of things you learn about them and the kind of stories it leads you to. The next thing I like to do when I travel is always keep a story bank. So this is the simple idea that, on our day-to-day basis, wherever we are traveling, we will come across a lot of small and big stories. And, because we're experiencing so many new things at the same time, new people, new culture, new food, new landscapes, a million thoughts are in our head. We often tend to lose these stories. So what I like to do is at the end of every day, or sometimes even twice or thrice a day, I like to make note of all the little stories that I've come across. These could be like really small conversations that have left a mark on me. These could be like little acts of kindness that I've experienced. These could be stories that eventually lead to, when you tie them together, they eventually lead to something much bigger. But the goal is to record all of this, because when you actually go back to wanting to tell that story, you'll realize that there are so many little details that you can tie together, of the kind of people you've met, of the way you've experienced the culture, of the way you've learned about food traditions and so forth. So keeping a story bank and just maybe writing a couple of lines about who you met, and what that interaction was like, why it was memorable for you, is a game changer. Now, the third thing that I love to do, both while I'm traveling, but also while I'm, in at home or in another place where I'm trying to write that story, is this idea of mind wandering. Especially in today's time when we have so much technology in our lives, we have so much social media, and we're always scrolling. I think our mind is always buzzing with like so many thoughts all the time. And I think mind wandering for me is this exercise where I try to consciously quieten the mind so I can think about only the story that I want to tell. So this can be as simple as taking a quiet walk just in your neighborhood, maybe going to a park or a forest if you have access to that. Being close to any kind of nature is really helpful. For example, if there's a spot that you love to see the sunrise or the sunset, that's a perfect example. But it could also mean, for example, I'm in Berlin right now and it's starting to become really cold. So for me, mind wandering now is to go to a neighborhood cafe, maybe have a warm cup of hot chocolate, and just gaze out at the from the window, look at what's outside, and really let my mind quieten down so I can think about the story that's brewing in my mind right now. And I think this idea of mind wandering really allows me to take a step back, to quieten all the distractions around me, and then think about how it is that I want to tell the story that I'm trying to tell. And especially if I'm struggling with, let's say, how do I open the story, what kind of an introduction I can use, and so on. And this applies to both, written story, but also visual stories. It really makes me contemplate, why this story is important and what is the best way to tell it, such that I'm representing local people, a local culture, a place. But it should also be something that, resonates with my readers or viewers, and something that really moves you inside, so that it's a story that stays with you. Otherwise, what's the point of telling it, right? And then the last point I want to share today is a very simple one, which is keep vigorous notes. I know this can feel like a lot of work, but actually it just means taking a step away every few hours or every day, maybe at night, to just write down a few things that have struck you. Maybe it could be about the colors that you've noticed, it could be about the food that you've tried, What are those flavors like? What is the aroma of that food? What is the landscape like where you are? What was the sky like where you were? What were the colors of sunset like? And I think when you start writing down these details, you actually start to observe them, not just as a traveler, but also as a writer or a visual storyteller, where it becomes a lot clearer in your mind what the entire picture is. And then for you to come back and repaint that scene in a story for your readers or your viewers becomes much easier. I don't use any fancy technique to keep my notes. A lot of it is in a journal that I always carry with me. A lot of it is in my audio notes on my iPhone. A lot of it is on just regular notes on my phone. Sometimes I send WhatsApp messages or emails to myself to remember certain things that I really want to remember or quote. And so, just this idea of keeping a record, especially of the conversations you've had, as well as the way you've experienced a place, the little observations that you've made, maybe the little cultural quirks that you've noticed, this makes a huge difference in terms of how you experience and then convey a place to your readers and your viewers. So, I discuss a lot of these storytelling techniques in my in depth course, which is called Get Paid to Travel the World with Purpose. And I think storytelling is such a key aspect of building your personal brand, your identity as a storyteller, but also unlocking opportunities to be paid. So, I work with a lot of brands around the world, tourism boards, accommodations, travel companies, and so forth. And one of the things I've learned is that the number of followers is not the most important thing that you're going to have. I don't have a million followers. I don't go viral often. I don't follow trends. I don't do a lot of stuff that is expected from a travel creator on social media. But I think what really resonates about my work with brands and the reason why this is still my career is because of the stories I tell. And so in my course, I not just talk about how do we tell meaningful, impactful stories, but also about your why of showing up as a travel creator. Why do you even travel? Why do you even tell stories? Building your personal brand, attracting the right audience, because that's the most valuable asset you'll have. And then how do you work with brands, irrespective of how many followers you have? And I think my course community is proof that whether it's hosted collaborations or paid partnerships, you don't have to have X number of followers in order to be able to do that. So people in my course community have scored both hosted and paid collaborations with just 1,000 or a few thousand followers. But really evolving their storytelling style has been key for them. I would love to hear from you in the comments what your relationship with storytelling is like. Do you try to tell stories based on your travels? Where do you struggle? Where do you find joy? And is there something that you would like me to deep dive into? And my next video is going to be about how do you choose a stay that is truly eco-friendly, truly sustainable, and not just greenwashing. If that's a subject that's important to you, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon.